Finding slopes of lines parallel and perpendicular to a line given in slope-intercept form. So I'm just going to remind you what slope-intercept form is. It's when you basically have it, your equation solved for y, and the x term is first, and then you have the constant term. So in general, you can see these equations of lines can look like something like ax plus by equals c. This is called the general form. It's not helpful, really. Basically, whenever you are going to be working with a line and trying to figure anything out with it, with the equation, it's good to just go ahead and solve it for y. I mean, it kind of depends if it's necessary, but in general, it's good to go ahead and get y by itself, and then your x term goes first, and your constant, your non-x term, goes second. And so then the coefficient on the x term is your slope, which is what's going to be most important when we're looking at finding parallel and perpendicular. And then the constant tells you the y-intercept, because it's what you get if you plug 0 in for x. So this whole x term will just zero out. So that's the y-intercept. And if we wrote that y-intercept as a coordinate pair, it would be 0, b. So the slope-intercept form makes it super easy to graph a line, because you can plot your y-intercept and then use your slope to kind of just count up and over to find more points. So let's look at one of these practice problems. Consider the line y equals -1/5 x minus 7. What is the slope of a line perpendicular to this line? And then b, what's the slope parallel? So basically, parallel, let me go with parallel first. Parallel lines look kind of like this, right? So they're going in the same direction, and a slope is the way that we sort of mathematically talk about the direction that something is pointing. So if two lines are going in the same direction, then that means their slopes are equal. So if you have parallel lines, you're going to have equal slopes. And you can kind of, the word parallel has two little parallel L's in it. Kind of looks like an equals on its side, but your slopes are equal. So if this is maybe line 1 and this is line 2, slope of line 1 is the same or equal to the slope of line 2. So looking then at this guy up here, because it's already in slope-intercept form, we can tell that the slope is -1/5, because that is the coefficient on the x. So m equals -1/5. Maybe I'll say m1, because that's our original line. So then for part b, that means if we want parallel, the parallel slope is going to be also -1/5. You keep it exactly as is. So m, maybe m2, equals -1/5. So any slope, the slope of any line that's parallel to this particular line would have slope -1/5. Okay, so then going backwards, let's talk about perpendicular. So perpendicular is a little bit more complicated, but not much. So if you have a perpendicular line, then you're making sort of this like 90-degree, well, it is 90 degrees, not sort of, but like sort of an X-looking thing. And so in some sense, it's kind of like they're going opposite directions, but not exactly. So if you have, okay, let me say this is line 1 and this is line 2. So then your negative, or your original slope, you're going to basically have to do opposite. So I think of it as it's negative reciprocal. So if you have your m1 and your m2, one is the opposite sign and reciprocal of the other, so -1/m2, or vice versa, it doesn't matter. So for example then, up here, since we're starting with -1/5, then if we change the sign and flip -1/5, we would have a positive 5/1, or of course just 5 is how we would type that in. So in general, negative reciprocal kind of pairs of numbers, it can take a little practice noticing what those look like. So obviously we just saw -1/5 and 5 would be a pair of perpendicular slopes. We could also have maybe -2 and +1/2, maybe 3/4 and -4/3. So you have to have both things opposite sign and flipped. Okay, so let's do another of these. So this one, it's actually not quite in slope-intercept form, y equals 5 minus 8x. To really be in slope-intercept form, we would want it to be in the correct order. So have the x term first, -8x plus 5. But as long as you remember that the slope is what is being multiplied by x, you're fine. So the slope here, what we might say for M1, is -8. So then I'll go in order, and they happen to have switched the order. A parallel slope, the slope of any line parallel is going to always be just the same. So that's the easier one. And then the slope of a line perpendicular would be, switch the sign, so it'll be positive, and then flip it 1/8.